Hey, what's going on everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at the all-new Minisforum UN1265 Mini PC. This is from their Venus series, and this thing's packing a pretty powerful little CPU with 10 cores and 16 threads. And just like a lot of the other Minisforum Mini PCs, you can pick this up in a few different configurations over on their website. You can go bare bones, and with that, you will need to add your own RAM and storage, or you can go all the way up to 32 gigabytes of pre-installed RAM and a 1TB M.2 SSD. Obviously, going bare bones is going to be cheaper out of the gate, and if you've already got an SSD and RAM laying around, then that might be your best choice. And another option they're going to be offering over on their website is a colorful body. That's what they're calling it. You can go with the silver that we have here or magical blue. Really like that blue. I'm a little colorblind, but it looks a little seafoam green to me. Either way, I personally love the way it looks, and it's great to have a few different color options to choose from. Along with the new UN1265, inside of the box, we're going to get a 6-foot HDMI cable. We also have a VESA mount with some hardware here for said mount and a 120 watt power supply. This isn't going to pull 120 watts from the wall. It actually doesn't get that close, but it's good to have a high wattage power supply that you know you can count on. Wanted to give you a quick look at the internals here, and this does support a 2.5-inch drive in the bottom of the case. It's actually really easy to get in here. There's 4 screws on the bottom, and we have access to the SSD, our dual channel RAM, and our Wi-Fi/Bluetooth card. All of this is user upgradable, and the SATA connection cable should already be plugged in with the mini PC, so all you'll need to do is add that 2.5-inch drive in the bottom of the bay. When it comes to I/O, up front here, we've got a 3.5mm audio jack and 2 full-size USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports. Not much going on around the sides. We do have a lot of ventilation for the small form factor PC. And moving around back, you can see we've got our power input. We've also got USB Type-C. This is full function, so we can do display out. 1 full-size HDMI port, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, 1 full-size display port, and 2 full-size USB 2.0 ports. Since this is coming to us from Minisforum's Venus line, we've got an Intel CPU. It's actually the Intel i7-12650H. With this, we get 10 cores, 16 threads, 6 performance cores up to 4.7 GHz, and 4 efficiency cores up to 3.5. Built-in Intel UHD graphics with 64 execution units, and this will run it up to 1.4 GHz. It'll support up to 64 gigabytes of DDR4 at 3200 MHz in dual channel. It's got a single PCIe 4.0 NVMe SSD, plus we can add that 2.5-inch drive in the bottom, Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5.2, and this one happens to be running Windows 11 right out of the box. Like I mentioned, they do offer a few different storage and RAM variants, but the cheapest way to get out is to pick up their bare bones unit, and it's coming in at $309 right now at the time of making this video. Now, the only thing I really see missing here from the external I/O is USB 4 or Thunderbolt 4 in this case, since we've got an Intel platform, but I'm still going to be testing out some gaming and emulation on this, because I know for a fact that this CPU can put out some absolutely amazing performance. Okay, so here we are with Windows 11, got everything updated and installed that we're going to be testing out, and this is a really quick system. Those 6 performance cores with this i7 do boost up to around 4.4 GHz while gaming. We've got that 16 gigabytes of 3200 MHz RAM and the UHD graphics. Now keep in mind, these aren't Intel Iris Xe. These only have 64 execution units, so this is kind of the only thing that'll hold this back while gaming with newer AAA games. But it actually does a really great job with older titles and especially emulation. I mean, the CPU here is really important when it comes to emulation, and we'll be taking a look at some of that by the end of the video. But first things first, I want to head over to Minisforum's website real quick. Just show you some web browsing. Using this as an everyday PC, we have plenty of power. This little thing is really quick. Using Wi-Fi 6 here, we can just go through, load up web pages, not a problem. You want to do some email checking and 4K video playback. That's the next thing we're going to be testing out here. Just found one of my go-to videos here, 4K 60 FPS HDR. We're at 4K, got stats for nerds up in the top left-hand corner, and this thing will power through 4K video. Even if you wanted to do 2 4K streams at 60, it'll run them both at full speed without dropping any frames. Now, this is actually running at a pretty decent TDP, but we can adjust it from the BIOS. Once this is finished up, we'll take a look at that. But even skipping through on this 4K 60 HDR video on YouTube doesn't drop any frames at all. So just going right ahead. And remember, we're also on Wi-Fi 6. This is kind of a big factor when it comes to drop frames for some of the mini PCs out there because it does need to kind of buffer out. But we've got fast enough speeds here that we can scrub through this whole video and not drop any kind of frames. And this will transfer over to local video also. Intel has always done a really great job with 4K video playback, so if you wanted to use this as kind of a little media center, not an issue. And of course, TDP does play a big role when it comes to performance in these mini PCs. You definitely need enough power to keep the clocks up on that CPU. And speaking of TDP, I wanted to give you a look at what this is set at out of the box. And from the BIOS, we can adjust this. We'll go to bench here, stress that CPU out. Right here, you'll see it jumps up to 45 watts. You can take this up to 65. The cooling system here can definitely handle it. And it's actually really quiet, even at 45 watts. And personally, I just think Minisforum is ahead of the game when it comes to cooling systems for these mini PCs, because heck, even on the new UM790, I can run that at 85 watts and never hit thermal throttle. Next thing I wanted to take a look at were some GPU benchmarks, and like I mentioned, I mean, this is not going to be a super high-end gaming PC, but we can still get by with some older stuff and emulation. When it comes to 3D Mark Night Raid with this 64 execution unit iGPU, we only scored a 15,397. And I also ran Wildlife, which is a Vulkan benchmark, so it's not going to win any awards for these synthetic GPU benchmarks, but I wanted to show you some real-world gaming. And first up, we've got OG Skyrim. I always like to throw this in, especially on these Intel iGPUs. We're at 1080p low settings, and unfortunately at all medium settings, we did get a few dips down into the mid-50s, and I thought that would happen with only having 64 EUs. If this was using the 80 EU or the 96 EU Intel Iris Xe, then we could definitely get better performance, but it's not bad for what we have here. Moving over to CSGO, we're at 1080p, low settings, and I probably should have just taken this to medium and turned VSync on, just kind of lock it down at 60. But with it set up like this, we did get an average of 98 FPS. And you know, I've been testing out CSGO on these Intel iGPUs the last couple weeks. I've noticed a lot of stuttering going on, and it really happens once you load into the game, kind of turning corners. But after a while, it definitely clears up. I think it's just shaders caching. And finally here, for the PC gaming portion, we've got Cyberpunk2077 720p all low settings. And I'm not just on the low preset, I've gone through and turned everything to low. I got an average of 41 FPS. It's much higher than I thought it was going to be, but again, a lot of people don't want to play this at 40 FPS, and I completely understand. But if you did pick something like this up for work, just note that, yeah, I mean, you can definitely play games on it. It's not going to be the highest frame rate. And with something like this, I would probably go to 900p low and lock it down at 35 FPS. Now, I wanted to move over to some emulation because this little setup definitely does an amazing job. God of War, Ghost of Sparta, definitely one of the harder ones to run for PSP. We're at 4x resolution, and I am using the DirectX 11 backend. You could go with Vulkan, I mean, they performed about the same, but I always just keep it with DirectX and these Intel iGPUs. So seeing how well this runs at 4x resolution, when it comes to the other easier to emulate PSP games, you're going to be able to breeze right through them. Moving over to some Gamecube, using the Dolphin emulator, we've got F-Zero GX on the hardest track, 720p, DirectX 11. I didn't see a dip under 60 one time, and if you take a look at Afterburner up in the top left-hand corner, you'll see it jump up to around 21 watts, which isn't that bad, and keep in mind, that's kind of separated between the CPU and GPU, so total there from that CPU, 21 watts to run this at 720p. And finally here, we've got some PS2 using PCSX2. We're at 1080p, Vulkan backend, Gran Turismo 4 running at 60. Even God of War 2 will run at 1080p, and you can see that we are pulling significantly more than we were with Gamecube, and that's just how it is with PS2 emulation. I've seen this jump up to around 32 watts, especially with a harder to emulate game. But it can run them, and it runs them amazingly. I always like to test total system power consumption with these mini PCs because, you know, in some parts of the world, energy costs are really high and people are looking for low-powered systems. And this one isn't the lowest that we've tested, but we are at a 45 watt TDP. I've got this plugged into a kilowatt meter while doing all of my testing, and at idle, this pulls 11 watts. While gaming, it jumped up to 57 watts, and the maximum that I could get this to pull was 68 watts from the wall. And keep in mind, that maximum is more of an extreme use case scenario. I max out all the cores and the iGPU at the same time. So overall, power consumption isn't horrible with this one either. So overall, I think we're seeing some great performance out of the Minisforum UN1265. I really wish they would have added Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4 on the exterior of this. That way we could easily plug in an eGPU and just get faster I/O speeds. But unfortunately, that's not the case here. Now, there is one way to add an eGPU to this. Since it does support a 2.5-inch drive, we could actually run the operating system from that and then use that PCIe 4.0 M.2 slot for an Oculink adapter. We could connect something like an RTX 4060 to this, or even a Radeon card very easily, and see some really great performance over Oculink, because that'll run faster than Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4. In fact, it does up to 63 gigs a second as opposed to 40 gigs a second. So if that's something you're interested in seeing, definitely let me know in the comments below. I wouldn't mind making a video like that, and I know this CPU does have more than enough power to keep up with something like an RTX 4060. So yeah, I do think it's a great little PC, and it's more accustomed to everyday work, office, and school work, but as you saw, we can definitely get some emulation out of the way, and older games will run just fine. If you're looking for something to run newer AAA games at 1080p or higher, Minisforum does offer some really awesome gaming PCs over on their website, but this one here really isn't made for gaming. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you're interested in learning more about the UN1265, I will leave some links to Minisforum's website. And if you've got any questions or want to see anything else running on this, just let me know in the comments below. Like always, thanks for watching.